Tonight, we're looking at four strange encounters that span nearly 900 years, from the mysterious green children of medieval England to a vanished military jet over Lake Superior to terrifying humanoid encounters deep in the forest of California and rural England. Welcome to Strange Encounters. In the 12th century, in the small English village of Woolpit, two children appeared from nowhere. They spoke a language no one recognized, their clothes were unfamiliar, and according to multiple medieval chroniclers, their skin was completely green. For nearly 900 years, historians, folklorists, and paranormal researchers have argued over what really happened. Was it a misunderstood historical event, a medieval folktale that slowly evolved into legend, or does the original account preserve something far stranger than anyone wants to admit? Tonight, we go back to the earlier surviving records to separate the original story from everything added afterward. In the mid-12th century, during the reign of King Stephen of England, a strange account emerged from the small village of Woolpit in Suffolk. This was a period known as the Anarchy, a civil war that lasted from 1135 to 1153. England at the time was politically unstable, socially fragmented, and in many regions effectively isolated. Most information traveled slowly, often by word of mouth, and written records were limited to clerical or monastic chroniclers. It is within this environment that the story of the so-called green children first appears. What makes this case unusual is not just the story itself, but the fact that it was recorded independently by two respected medieval writers. The first was William of Newburgh, an English historian and Augustinian canon, writing his chronicle, Historia Rerum Anglicarum, around the year 1198. The second was Ralph of Coggeshall, an abbot and chronicler, writing his Chronicon Anglicanum sometime in the late 12th century or very early 13th century, likely between 1187 and 1220. Both men were writing at least several decades after the event they described. Most historians place the incident itself somewhere in the mid-1100s, likely between 1140 and 1170, though no exact year is recorded. Neither chronicler witnessed the event firsthand. Both relied on second-hand reports, accounts passed through local sources before being written down. And yet, despite this, their descriptions share a number of highly specific and consistent details. According to William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, two children, a boy and a girl, were discovered near a series of wolf pits in Woolpit. These pits, from which the village takes its name, were deep excavations used to trap wolves, a real and persistent threat in medieval England. The children were described as physically normal in every respect except for one detail. Their skin was green. Not marked or painted, but uniformly green in tone. They wore clothing that the villagers did not recognize, described as unusual in both material and construction. And when they spoke, it was in a language completely unknown to anyone present. Unable to communicate with them, the villagers brought the children to the household of a local landowner, identified in both accounts as Richard de Calne. It was here that the children were observed more closely. According to both chroniclers, the children initially refused all food offered to them. They would not eat bread, meat, or any prepared dishes. For several days, they appeared unable or unwilling to consume anything at all. Then, a specific detail appears in both accounts. The children were presented with raw, broad beans. At the sight of them, they reacted immediately, recognizing the food and consuming it eagerly. For a time, this was the only thing they would eat. Over the following days and weeks, they gradually adapted to other foods, and as they did, another change occurred. The green color of their skin began to fade. Eventually, according to both William and Ralph, the pigmentation disappeared entirely. At this point, the story begins to diverge slightly between the two sources. Both agree that the boy, the younger of the two, did not survive. He is described as weak or sickly, and he died not long after their arrival, possibly following baptism. The girl, however, survived. She learned English over time and was eventually able to describe where she believed she had come from. Her account is one of the most discussed aspects of the case, but it is important to note that even here, the details are filtered through translation, interpretation, and retelling. She claimed that she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land, a land where, according to her description, there was no full daylight. The sun never rose high in the sky. Instead, the land existed in a constant state of twilight. Everything there, she said, had a greenish hue. Animals, people, even the environment itself. From this point, the two chroniclers present slightly different versions of how the children arrived in Woolpit. In the account of Ralph of Coggeshall, the children described entering a cave while tending livestock. Inside, they heard the sound of bells, specifically the ringing of church bells. Drawn toward the sound, they followed it through the darkness, eventually emerging into a world that was no longer their own. In contrast, William of Newburgh version is less detailed and more ambiguous. In his telling, the children reported hearing a loud noise, often interpreted as bells, and then suddenly finding themselves in an unfamiliar place without a clear description of a cave or journey. The difference, while subtle, is important. It shows that even at the earliest stage of the story's recording, the details were not entirely fixed. William of Newburgh himself expressed a degree of hesitation about the account. In his writing, he notes that the story is widely reported and that he feels compelled to include it, but his tone suggests uncertainty. He does not present it as confirmed fact, but as a strange report that resists easy explanation. Ralph of Coggeshall, by comparison, presents the narrative with fewer reservations, though he too relies on second-hand information. Beyond these two sources, the historical record becomes less stable. There are no known contemporary mentions of the event in other major chronicles of the time, including the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is often detailed in its recording of unusual events. This absence does not disprove the story, but it does limit its historical corroboration. As the surviving girl grew older, she is said to have integrated into local society. Some later accounts claim she was baptized and eventually married, though these details become increasingly uncertain and are not firmly established in the earliest sources. What is clear is that after the initial recording, the story did not remain unchanged. In the centuries that followed, it began to evolve. By the 16th century, the antiquarian William Camden referenced the story, but dismissed it as likely exaggerated or untrue. In the 17th century, Robert Burton, in his work The Anatomy of Melancholy, mentioned the case and suggested more speculative interpretations, including the idea that the children may have come from a supernatural or celestial realm. Around the same period, Francis Godwin, an English bishop and writer, incorporated similar ideas into early speculative fiction, linking unusual arrivals on Earth to journeys from other worlds. It is here, several hundred years after the original accounts, that the story begins to shift. What began as a localized report becomes something else, reinterpreted through the lens of changing cultural beliefs. In later folklore, the green children are sometimes described as inhabitants of a fairy world. In modern retellings, they are occasionally framed as extraterrestrial visitors. But these interpretations are not present in the original 12th century text. They are additions, layered onto the story over time. Today, several explanations are commonly proposed. One suggests the children were Flemish orphans, displaced during regional conflicts, speaking a dialect unfamiliar to English villagers. Another proposes a medical condition, chlorosis, or severe iron deficiency, as a possible cause of the green skin. Others interpret the story as symbolic or folkloric, representing encounters with outsiders or the unknown. None of these explanations appear in the original accounts. They are attempts, modern and historical, to resolve a narrative that was never clearly explained in the first place. What remains when all interpretations are set aside is a simple but persistent core. Two medieval chroniclers writing independently in the late 12th century recorded an unusual report from the village of Woolpit. They agreed on the central details, they differed on some specifics, and neither could fully explain what had taken place. Over time, the story grew. Details were added, meanings were assigned, and the unknown was shaped into something more familiar. But beneath those layers, the original account still exists, fragmented, secondhand, uncertain, and still, after nearly 900 years, unresolved. On the night of November 23, 1953, two United States Air Force officers climbed into the cockpit of a jet interceptor at Kinross Air Force Base in Michigan and took off into the darkness over Lake Superior. Minutes later, the aircraft vanished. No distress call, no confirmed wreckage, no bodies. And according to radar operators on the ground, the last thing they saw before the jet disappeared was its radar return merging with an unidentified object over the lake. More than 70 years later, the case remains one of the most controversial military UFO incidents of the Cold War era, not because of sensational rumors or anonymous witnesses, but because this was a real military scramble involving documented personnel, official radar tracking, and a missing United States Air Force aircraft that was never recovered. To understand why the Kinross Incident became so famous, it helps to understand the period in which it happened. The early 1950s were a tense and uncertain time in North America. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was intensifying. Nuclear fears were growing, military radar networks were expanding across the continent, and both governments were deeply concerned about the possibility of Soviet bombers approaching through the Arctic and across the Great Lakes region. Because of this threat, the skies over northern America were being watched constantly. Air defense radar stations operated around the clock, and interceptor aircraft sat ready to launch at a moment's notice whenever an unknown target appeared on radar screens. One of those interceptor aircraft was a Northrop F-89 Scorpion. The F-89 was a large twin-engine jet designed specifically for all-weather interception missions. Its role was to launch quickly, locate unidentified aircraft at night or in poor weather, and investigate or intercept them before they could threaten North American airspace. But the aircraft also had a troubled reputation. early versions of the F-89 suffered from structural problems and mechanical issues. Several crashes had already occurred during the aircraft's early service life, and pilots knew the jet could be difficult to handle under certain conditions. Still, on that November night in 1953, the aircraft was exactly what the Air Force depended on to investigate unknown radar targets. At approximately 6:22 p.m., radar operators detected an unidentified object moving over Lake Superior near the Canadian border. The object was reportedly traveling at a speed and course that caused concern among air defense personnel. Because this was the height of the Cold War, unidentified aircraft near sensitive airspace were taken very seriously. An interceptor scramble order was issued from Kinross Air Force Base. The aircraft selected for the mission was an F-89C Scorpion carrying First Lieutenant Felix Eugene Moncla Jr. and Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson. Lieutenant Moncla was 26 years old, a pilot originally from Louisiana. Wilson served as the radar observer seated behind him in the aircraft. The F-89 launched into cold night skies over Lake Superior and began climbing toward the unknown radar target. Weather conditions that evening were not ideal. Reports described cold temperatures, clouds, strong winds, and snow flurries moving across the lake region. Visibility was limited in places, and the darkness over Lake Superior would have made visual navigation extremely difficult. Still, ground radar operators continued guiding the interceptor toward the unidentified object, and this is where the story becomes deeply unsettling. According to later reports from radar personnel, the interceptor's radar return gradually approached the unknown target on their scopes until eventually the two blips appeared to merge into one. Then the radar return disappeared completely. No separation, no visible turnaway, no emergency signal. The interceptor simply vanished from radar. Repeated radio calls received no response. At first, personnel reportedly assumed the aircraft might have descended below radar coverage or experienced communications problems. But as the minutes passed and no contact was reestablished, concern quickly turned into alarm. Search operations began almost immediately. Aircraft searched the region over Lake Superior while rescue crews monitored the shoreline for any sign of wreckage or survivors. Nothing was found. No floating debris, no oil slick, no bodies, no confirmed crash site. And that absence of physical evidence would become one of the central mysteries of the case. In the years that followed, the Kinross disappearance became one of the most discussed military UFO incidents in America. Part of the reason was the strange radar narrative surrounding the disappearance. But another major reason involved the growing public debate over UFO secrecy during the 1950s. One of the most influential figures in that debate was a man named Donald Keyhoe. Today, many younger listeners may not recognize the name, but during the early UFO era, Donald Keyhoe was one of the most famous civilian UFO researchers in the United States. Keyhoe was a former Marine Corps major, aviation writer, and director of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, known as NICAP. NICAP became one of the largest civilian UFO organizations of the 1950s and 1960s, and Keyhoe strongly believed that the United States government possessed more information about UFOs than it was willing to release publicly. He argued that military officials were downplaying or suppressing significant UFO cases in order to avoid public panic or national security concerns. The Kinross disappearance became one of the cases Keyhoe frequently discussed. In later writings and interviews, Keyhoe described statements allegedly made by radar operators involved in the incident. One of the most famous claims was that the unknown object appeared to swallow the interceptor on radar. That phrase would become legendary within UFO history. But this is also where separating fact from interpretation becomes important. Modern radar specialists point out that a radar merge does not necessarily mean one object physically consumed another. It can simply refer to two radar returns becoming too close together to distinguish separately on the scope. In other words, the radar blips overlapping does not automatically prove a collision or impossible event occurred. However, critics of the official explanation point out something equally important. Even if the radar returns merely merge visually, the interceptor still disappeared immediately afterward and was never recovered. That fact remains difficult to explain completely. As public interest in the case grew, the United States Air Force eventually offered a more conventional explanation. According to later official statements, the unidentified radar target may not have been a UFO at all. Instead, the Air Force suggested that the object was likely a Canadian Air Force transport aircraft, possibly a C-47, that had drifted slightly off course. Under this explanation, the F-89 successfully approached the aircraft, the radar returns overlapped normally, and then the interceptor later crashed due to some unrelated mechanical failure or pilot error. On the surface, that explanation sounds reasonable, but the problem is that it did not resolve several important questions. If the target had been identified normally, why did communications with the interceptor end so abruptly? Why was no distress call ever transmitted? Why was no wreckage found despite search efforts? And perhaps most importantly, why did later Canadian military correspondence appear to contradict parts of the Air Force explanation? Researchers associated with NICAP later contacted the Royal Canadian Air Force while investigating the case. According to documents discussed by UFO researchers, Canadian officials reportedly stated they had no knowledge of one of their aircraft being involved in such an intercept incident. That contradiction fueled suspicions that the full story had not been told publicly. Over the years, different researchers attempted to reconcile the discrepancy. Some believed the Canadian response may have referred only to knowledge of the incident itself rather than denying the aircraft's existence entirely. Others believe a Canadian aircraft really was present but slightly off its intended route. And some investigators argue the entire Canadian aircraft explanation was introduced later simply to reduce UFO speculation surrounding the disappearance. Unfortunately, many original military records connected to the incident are incomplete, missing, or contradictory. And because the event occurred during a highly secretive Cold War period, determining exactly what happened has proven extremely difficult. The lack of wreckage has only intensified the mystery. Lake Superior is enormous, deep, and notoriously dangerous. Numerous ships and aircraft have disappeared there over the decades, and it is entirely possible for wreckage to remain hidden permanently beneath its waters. Still, aviation accidents usually leave traces behind. Even catastrophic crashes often produce floating debris, fuel slicks, or recoverable fragments. In the Kinross case, nothing conclusively tied to the missing interceptor was ever recovered. Years later, stories circulated about possible debris washing ashore and rumors of wreckage discoveries beneath the lake, but none were definitively confirmed as belonging to Moncla's aircraft, and so the mystery continued to grow. For UFO researchers, the Kinross Incident became one of the strongest examples of a military aircraft disappearing during an interception of an unidentified craft. For skeptics and aviation historians, the case likely represents a tragic but explainable Cold War accident involving dangerous weather, imperfect radar technology, and an aircraft type already known for reliability problems. But even today, several critics' questions remain unanswered. What exactly did radar operators observe that night in real time? Was the famous merge story exaggerated later, or was something genuinely unusual witnessed on radar? Was there truly a Canadian aircraft involved? If so, why do official accounts appear inconsistent? Why did the Air Force explanation evolve over time? And perhaps most importantly, what happened to the F-89 Scorpion carrying Felix Moncla and Robert Wilson? More than 70 years later, no one can answer those questions with certainty. The Kinross disappearance remains suspended somewhere between aviation mystery, Cold War confusion, and UFO history. An interceptor was launched into the night over Lake Superior. Ground radar tracked it toward an unknown object. The radar returns came together, and then the aircraft disappeared forever. September 4th, 1964. Deep in the mountains near Cisco Grove, California, 3 bow hunters separated as darkness settled over the forest. Only 2 of them would return to camp with a normal story. The third came back terrified, missing most of his clothing, violently sick, and convinced he had spent the night trapped in a tree while strange humanoid figures and mechanical beings tried to force him down. What makes the case unsettling isn't just the bizarre details, it's the fact that investigators believed him. Labor Day weekend, 1964. The Sierra Nevada mountains were already cooling down as hunting season began in Northern California. 3 men from the Sacramento area had driven into the wilderness near Cisco Grove for a bow hunting trip. The area was rugged, steep, and isolated. Granite ridges, scattered brush, dense timber, and deep canyons that became dangerous after dark. Late in the afternoon of September 4th, the hunters spread out while tracking game. As evening approached, one of the men, identified publicly only as S, became separated from the others. At first, he wasn't worried. The plan was simple. He would move along a ridge and circle back toward camp. But somewhere in the fading light, he realized he had made a mistake. The ridge ended abruptly in a sheer drop into a canyon below. To get back, he would have to retrace his path through unfamiliar terrain in near darkness. As he moved through the canyon, he suddenly heard crashing sounds nearby in the brush. Heavy movement, large movement. S immediately thought it was a bear. Fearing an attack, he climbed the nearest tree and waited silently in the darkness. Eventually, the sound stopped. Believing the animal had moved on, he climbed down and tried to signal for help. He built 3 small fires, hoping someone might see them, but no one came. Then he noticed something below the horizon. At first, it looked like a lantern. He assumed his friends were searching for him, but then the light suddenly darted upward, rising over the trees with impossible speed. Now he thought it might be a rescue helicopter, but that idea vanished the moment the object stopped in midair. No engine noise, no rotor blades, no sound at all. The light hovered motionless in the canyon, and that was when S climbed back into the tree. The tree itself would become central to the entire encounter. It was massive at the base, impossible for one man to wrap his arms around completely. The trunk rose branchless for about 12 feet before sparse limbs extended upward into the darkness. S climbed to that first section of branches and watched. The glowing object appeared to be roughly 8 to 10 inches across from his perspective, bright white and accompanied by several smaller lights moving in formation around it. Then something even stranger happened. The lights circled the tree. A flash erupted nearby, and S saw a dark object fall to the ground. Moments later, he noticed what he described as a dome-shaped craft resting roughly 400 to 500 yards away near the canyon floor. Then came the sounds, movement in the brush, something approaching through the manzanita. S watched as a figure emerged from the shadows. It appeared humanoid, but not entirely human. Soon, a second figure approached from another direction. The two beings moved carefully through the canyon before stopping directly beneath the tree where S was hiding. They looked up at him. According to S, both figures stood around 5'5". They wore silvery gray suits that extended seamlessly over their heads. No facial features were visible. No eyes, no mouth, no exposed skin. At intervals throughout the night, S heard strange cooing or hooting noises echoing through the canyon. Whether the sounds came from the beings themselves or from owls nearby, he could never determine. But each time the noise occurred, the figures reacted immediately. Then a third entity arrived, and this one terrified him. Unlike the first two, it moved clumsily through the brush, crashing into bushes rather than stepping around them. S later described it as dark gray or black in color. Its neck was barely visible. Where a face should have been were two glowing reddish-orange eyes roughly 3 inches wide. And when its mouth opened, the entire lower section of its face seemed to drop downward into a rectangular opening stretching nearly across its head. S believed it wasn't alive at all. He called it a robot. The two silver-suited figures attempted to climb the tree, but according to S, they seemed unable to understand how. They tried boosting one another upward unsuccessfully while the dark robotic figure remained below, watching. That was when the attack began. S later admitted he was completely terrified. He tied himself to the upper branches using his belt to avoid falling if he lost consciousness. Then the robot opened its mouth. A puff of white smoke or gas emerged. Seconds later, S became dizzy, then blacked out. When he regained consciousness, he was violently sick and barely hanging onto the tree. Desperate, he started setting pieces of his own clothing on fire and throwing them downward at the entities below. First his cap, then parts of his camouflage oversuit, then papers and scraps from his jacket. The burning material briefly forced the figures backward, but the attacks continued. Again and again, the robot released the strange gas. Each time, S would lose consciousness for a few moments before waking nauseated and disoriented. At one point, he fired 3 arrows directly at the dark figure below. According to his account, the arrow struck the entity's chest and produced visible sparks on impact. The force knocked the figure backwards several feet. To S, that confirmed his belief that it was mechanical. At another moment, he threw his canteen to the ground. One of the silver-suited figures picked it up and appeared to examine it curiously. Over the course of the night, S threw down nearly everything he had: his bow, silver coins, burning clothing, anything that might keep the beings away from the tree. As dawn finally approached, the eastern sky began turning pink over the mountains. S believed the ordeal was ending. Instead, it became even stranger. 2 robotic entities now stood beneath the tree facing one another. Then, according to S, sparks and glowing light appeared between their chests. A cloud of gas filled the air. He blacked out once more. When he regained consciousness, the entities were gone. The canyon was silent. S was hanging limp from the tree, exhausted, freezing, and barely conscious. Most of his clothing had been destroyed during the night. He believed the beings had assumed he was dead. Eventually, he climbed down. At first, even ordinary sights terrified him. Smoke drifting near a rock caused panic, until he realized it was only residue from one of the fires he had started hours earlier. Weak, nauseated, and suffering from exposure, he began trying to find his way back toward camp. At one point, he collapsed entirely. Then he heard a whistle. One of his hunting companions had found him. Back at camp, the other hunters listened to S's story, and one detail immediately stood out. One of the men admitted he had seen an unusual glowing object descending slowly in the distance the previous evening. That sighting matched the timing of S's encounter. The case eventually reached civilian UFO investigators associated with the organization APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. Among those involved was physicist James Harder, who conducted interviews regarding the incident. Investigators reportedly found S sincere and deeply shaken by the experience. According to the original account, S had also reported the event to Air Force personnel. Their response was dismissive. Officials suggested he may have encountered pranksters or possibly local residents playing tricks on him in the wilderness, but no explanation was ever offered for the lights, or the missing clothing, or the physical illness he reportedly suffered afterward. More than 60 years later, the Cisco Grove encounter remains one of the strangest humanoid cases in American UFO history. Unlike many stories from that era, this account wasn't a brief roadside sighting or a distant light in the sky. According to the witness, this was an all-night confrontation at close range. A terrified man trapped in a tree until dawn, watching silent figures move beneath him in the darkness. And whether the beings were extraterrestrial, experimental technology, hallucinations caused by exhaustion, or something else entirely, one question still lingers in the shadows of the Sierra Nevada mountains. What was waiting for him in the canyon that night? The year is 1978. Somewhere in the countryside near Frodsham, Cheshire, a small group of teenage boys move quietly through farmland at night. They are not supposed to be there. They are poaching, keeping low, avoiding attention, listening for anything that might give them away. What they hear instead is something none of them can place. A sound begins, low at first, not quite mechanical, not quite natural. A kind of steady hum that seems to sit in the air rather than travel through it. It is close enough to matter. Then the light appears. There is no clear approach, no distant movement crossing the sky. It is simply there, illuminating part of the field, bright enough to draw attention, but not blinding, controlled, deliberate. At some point, the shape behind the light becomes apparent. A craft, low to the ground or just above it. The exact form is unclear in the accounts that survive, but it is structured, solid, and out of place in a quiet English field. Then they realize they are not looking at it alone. There are figures near the object, multiple, moving with purpose. Not animals, not people in any normal sense, human-like in shape, but wrong in ways that are difficult to define. They are close enough to observe, but not close enough to understand. There's no clear communication, no dramatic interaction, just presence, the kind that makes it immediately clear that something is happening that should not be happening here. The boys do not stay. Whatever curiosity brought them out that night is gone, replaced by something more immediate, fear, or something close to it. They leave the area quickly, putting distance between themselves and whatever they have just seen. And then, for a long time, nothing is said. There is no official report, no statements taken, no investigation. The circumstances explain why. They were trespassing, breaking the law. Going forward would have meant explaining what they were doing there in the first place. What remains is a fragment of a story. passed along later with gaps that were never filled in. No precise time beyond the year, no detailed descriptions beyond what could be recalled, just the core of the experience stripped down to its essentials. A light in a field, a craft where no craft should be, figures moving around it, and a group of witnesses who had every reason to stay quiet. It's easy to dismiss a case like this because of what it lacks. No names, no evidence, no documentation from the time. But the silence around it is not empty. It has a cause, and that makes it different from stories that simply fade away. If anything happened out there that night, it happened in a place where it was never meant to be witnessed. The boys were not supposed to be there, and whatever they saw was not meant for them. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the strange and unknown. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you in the next episode of Strange Encounters.